Well, a very warm welcome to everyone to this session on insights and qualitative research. My name is Ivana Radovojevic, and I'm the project coordinator, project manager with ATLAS.ti. And I'm very pleased to be here today and to introduce this series of webinars that's organized by the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and sponsored by ATLAS.ti, the software for qualitative data analysis. The objective of this webinar series is to offer insights into innovative approaches and practices and qualitative analysis, and with qualitative methods more generally. We strongly believe that sponsoring this initiative can help reach people all around the world, democratize knowledge, and help researchers by providing these sessions for free. And I also want to express my gratitude to Professor Emerita Karen Olson, who came to us several years ago with this brilliant idea to launch this project. And so without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor to the leader of the International Qualitative Research Toolkit, Professor Olson.
Thank you very much. Hello, and I would like to also welcome you to this session. I'm Karen Olson, and I'm based at the International Qualitative Research Toolkit at UBC Okanagan campus. I respectfully acknowledge the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their people, on whose traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory UBC Okanagan is situated. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. At this time, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Bukola Salami. And Bukola, I'd like you to say a few words about yourself before beginning your talk. I tried to piece together a bio, and it's extensive, and I thought you probably would do a better job just telling people a little bit about yourself.
I am Bukola Salami. I'm just going to share my screen. And I believe you can see my screen. I'm Bukola Salami, an associate professor at the Faculty of Nursing, University of Alberta, and I'm also the director of Intersections of Gender Signature Area in the Office of Vice President Research at the University of Alberta. My main area of research interest is immigrant health, and I have been engaged in around 70 or 80 funded research projects in this area. So I have led 30 of these research grants, mainly in the area of immigrant health, African people's health, African migrants' health. I am the founder of the African Child and Youth Migration Network, which is a network of researchers across the globe focused on African child and youth migration. We have researchers from around 40 countries. Today, I'll be presenting to you about grant writing for early career researchers in a global context. Some of the things that I would present today really relates to how do you apply for or ensure success in grants. If you're a early career researcher, including, for example, if you're located outside the Canadian border, if you're located in Africa, South America, and several other countries. As Karen has acknowledged, I also wish to acknowledge that I am located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous people, including the Cree, the Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories continue to enrich a vibrant community. I would also like to acknowledge those of some of us in Canada, some people in Canada who are possibly displaced, particularly because of the transatlantic slave trade. I am very mindful of the broken promises and covenants with Indigenous people, and I strive to make it right with Indigenous people and also with the land. So if you're thinking of applying for global health research funding, I think one of the challenges people face is, where do I apply to? Where does the grant exist? There are several listings, if you just Google, of global health funding agencies. The ones that I am most aware of are the ones located in Canada. So we have Global Challenge, Grand Challenges. So there's Grand Challenges US, and then there's also Grand Challenges Canada. In terms of Grand Challenges Canada, a lot of their funding tends to be between $100,000 and $250,000 or $300,000. And also tends to be health related most of the time. Global Challenge, that is a funding agency in the UK, and you can look at what their priorities are. There's Global Affairs Canada, and Global Affairs Canada tends to have funding between the range of I've never seen one that is less than $2 million, between $2 million and $50 million. Now, this type of grants may be something that may be too big for an early career researchers in the initial years, but it's something that you can ladder up to. Of course, you need to have worked within the committee or within the organization on the research project that you plan to. And Global Affairs Canada also relies on Canada's Feminist International Policy, which states that 90% of funding must be allocated to addressing either issues with gender equality, issues related to women, or issues related to children. And also as a focus on alleviating poverty. There are several calls. If you go on their website, you'll be able to see if there are any calls available. There's also the International Development Research Center, and the International Development Research Center funds research related to global development, global health, economic development. Tends to, funding is concentrated, of course, largely in low-income countries, especially Africa and Asia, and sometimes South America. Global Affairs Canada, there's a way, if you go on their website, you'll be able to sign up to receive any update. So anytime there's a funding call, you can receive updates. You can also do the same for Grand Challenges Canada to receive any updates. Applying also, you can apply to also charitable foundations. And there are several charitable foundations out there, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and several others. If you're a nurse, there's Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing, and they often have funding that is more on the lower side, maybe around 5,000, 10,000. But I would really encourage you as early career researchers. Sometimes the rule of the game is the more you get, the more you get. And you have to oftentimes prove yourself in smaller grants before you can aim for the bigger grants. So I would encourage you to look at Sigma Theta Tau and small funding agencies to sort of jumpstart your career. And hopefully, once you have a pilot, then you can move to higher and be able to demonstrate, yes, you've been able to complete this successfully. And how does this inform your future work and build on your future work? There are several listings, as I have said, including Community of Science as a long list. But the problem with Community of Science is sometimes your institution has to have an affiliation, or has to have to be on the list of people subscribed to the listings. So some of the things to consider before applying for funding includes: does the funding agency share your goals? Is the funding agency interested in the same population? So for example, there are some funding agencies that are really, really focused on addressing issues related to maternal and child health, the funding call is focused on maternal and child health. No matter how beautiful or nice your proposal on elderly populations are, it's not going to get funded because that's not your priority. Have they made awards to institutions like yours in the past? So for example, if your institution is not a university, have they made awards to non-university? Or if you are a university, a researcher at the university, Have they made awards to universities in the past? So there are a few organizations that, they fund NGOs, but not academic institutions. Does the agency require matching funds? So there are some funding agencies that require matching funds. So for example, as I have told you, the Global Affairs Canada, which is usually between $2 and $50 million, they usually require matching funds of between 5% and 10% of the funding. And that can be both in kind and or cash, matching funds. When will the award be made? Does the funding agency emphasize specific aspects of proposal? So several funding agencies may have a different twist on what they want on proposals. There are some funding agencies that tend to be in their structure, much more oriented towards qualitative research, towards quantitative research. Or some agencies may have policy statements already on knowledge mobilization, and how that should be structured, whether or not you have to have community engagement, whether or not you have to have pilot data. So especially the bigger funding pots tend to require you to have some pilot data. So you want to look at that. And then also consider your institutional capacity. Oftentimes it's part of the evaluation, your expertise. And as early career researchers, sometimes it's a good idea to be a co-investigator on a research project before going for yours, or start small and also build up. Or the other thing is build on your doctoral work. So you can use the findings of your doctoral work or your master's work to use as pilot data for something bigger. We'll talk about the reviewer. So most of the people reviewing your work, they are oftentimes very, very busy people. They are not early career researchers, they are oftentimes established researchers, and they are oftentimes researchers that have a lot already on their plate. They may be tired by the time they get to your application. So because of that, you want to make sure that you state the objectives in the first paragraph, that you start with a clear title. And oftentimes, or all the time, they're using a rubric or a proposal evaluation criteria. And that means you need to review the rubric or proposal evaluation criteria before you start writing. You have to you should identify where you will answer each proposal evaluation question in the application, and evaluate your application using the rubric. So, start with the rubric, end with the rubric, and also ensure someone else also evaluates and gives you feedback using the rubric. They also hate grammar errors, and grammar errors, you may have the most brilliant proposal, and grammar errors may throw them off and just think, give them a bad bias about your proposal. So you want to make sure that you proofread your work, and this is usually a problem for researchers in non-Western society. You want to make sure you read it out loud. At least I find when I read my work out loud, I'm able to catch things that I may not be able to catch by just reading it. Edit your work. And sometimes some people use editors. Some of my students from Africa have told me in the past that they also use Grammarly. I've never tried it before, but there was a student, I read a proposal. I'm like, how come there's no error in your proposal? It's just like Grammarly. So just telling you that that's also out there. I've never used it, so I don't know how it works. Tips for grant writing. So start early. And usually grant writing takes a lot of time, 3 to 6 months at least before. If there's an information session, attend the information session. There are a few grants that sometimes they may have program officers for questions. And if you have questions that you can contact, ensure you've answered all the questions included in the evaluation proposal. Ensure your proposal is complete. Proofread your work, and also ensure that you have all the appendices required. So they may, for example, require you to put letters of support. Some of them may have you put, a knowledge mobilization plan in the appendix. Some of them may have you put student training in the appendix. You want to ensure that you have that. Proofread your work, have it reviewed by others, especially people with similar background as the researchers. So for example, if you know that the adjudication committee is going to be an interdisciplinary adjudication committee, then you probably want to give it to someone that is outside of your discipline to read and ensure that they understand. Ensure your proposal is focused on the priority area of the call. Use the same words in the proposal evaluation criteria. So, there was a proposal that I was helping the community organization to write, and I remember the community organization, said, we are people of African descent. Well, the funding call says Black. So I'm like, no, we have to use Black. No, we are people, no, for this funding call, it says Black, so you have to use Black because that's what the reviewers. Well, guess what? The evaluation came back and some applications were denied. And this was actually in the news because they were told that some organizations were told that they were not Black, which was written in this application as our feedback. And we were able to challenge back and say, no, we wrote it there that we are a Black organization. And that helped us. And the organization was able to get their funding, which was around 45,000 that they could have used by just using a different word. Review your work against the evaluation criteria. Also ensure the correct font size, margins, and formatting. So some funding agencies will require you to have specific formatting, specific font size, and also build positive relationship, and also positive bias. So, it's a really, really bad idea for you to submit really crappy work to a funding agency, because sometimes that helps in terms of people having a bad perspective or unfavorable bias about you. So you want to ensure that everything you put out is always crisp. Component of a research grant application, and this is not meant to be a presentation on research methods. Rather, it's on grant application writing. So I expect that you would already know about research methods. So literature review, questions, hypotheses, objectives, theoretical framework, methodology, expertise, student training, knowledge mobilization, budget and budget justification. Now, there will be some grants that would not have, for example, student training in it. So you have to look at the priorities of the funder if they expect you to train students as part of the funding agents funding call. So, for example, I know IDRC grant application usually does not prioritize way too much student training in their grant applications. So in terms of the literature review, I would suggest that when you begin your literature review, that in the first paragraph, have a short paragraph at the beginning that summarizes the project and identify the purpose. So sometimes some people have a 20-page proposal and you won't know what they plan to do until like page 7. And it's like, okay, so what have I been reading? And you want to start, that early. And usually I have a small section on in the beginning that states clearly the purpose and the objectives. Short setting of context to frame the project. What is the current state of knowledge on the topic? So you want to look at the current state of knowledge on the topic in your literature review. Ensure you're comprehensive and your literature review is current and within the last 5 years. And this is often a challenge for individuals in low and middle income countries to ensure currency. I tend to see much more older literature. So there are several places that you can search. Google Scholar, PubMed, that you can search for literature. Now, some of the challenges, of course, with Google Scholar and PubMed is, sometimes you won't have access to the full text, especially if you're in a country where your university does not subscribe to it, which is a challenge, that I know that, some of you face. But increasingly, the good news is more and more journals are coming out with open access that then you can be able to access. What is the gap in the literature? Ensure you have included major works from main players in the field. It also depends on where you're applying to. So for example, if I was a researcher applying to the Canadian Institute of Health Research, which funds health information, and I was using, let's say, intersectionality perspective, I would be citing health researchers in intersectionality. So I will be citing Avinsky because I know a lot of reviewers, that's the person they will be familiar with. If I was an intersectionality researcher and I wanted to use intersectionality theory, and I was, applying to Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, I wouldn't be citing Avinsky. I would be citing a social science researcher, and now I don't know how how her name could, get off my head. So, or if I was a post-colonial theory, I would be citing, for example, Chris Spivak, and not citing a health researcher instead. What is the gap in the literature? What research have you done in the past, and now does it build on previous research? So at some point in your background, in your literature review, it's always good to demonstrate or to have a pilot data to really state that you've done some work in the field and this builds on previous work. It also helps in demonstrating your capacity and capability as a researcher. So for many early career researchers, that may be, what is the findings of your doctoral work? And now does this build on some of the findings of your doctoral work? Where does your research fit? So what? So, for those that don't know in terms of how to do a literature review, this is the most basic for a researcher that is starting out in terms of doing a literature review. There are several ways to do a literature review. This is just one of several ways. And oftentimes it also depends on your familiarity with the data. So if you're someone that you've done doctoral work and you're familiar with the data, what you can do is, jot down ideas first in terms of, based on what you know about the field, and ensure logic. And then complete the literature search. So you may go on PubMed and enter some keywords to really search for the literature, or go on Google Scholar. Start with looking at literature reviews in the field. And I suggest that for researchers who do not know as much about the field that they're planning to go into. That's what I tend to do. I start with broad review of literature to get a broad orientation. And then I refine my outline based on the literature review. Then I start diving more into research literature and primary data sources, research literature that has primary data. And then I try to identify the gaps in the literature. It's important to identify the gaps in the literature, but it's also important to identify how researchers have done similar projects in the past. So you may be able to actually get ideas on informing the directions of your methodology, and take notes and write. So this is one, I'm trying to look at why I put this here. This is an example of a place where I identified, a literature review that I did in the past, looking at, and this wasn't actually for research. This was in identifying a gap in the literature and related to a program for Black youths in Canada. And I think I had one. Oh, sorry. I thought I had another component. So objectives, consider aligning it with the phases of your research. So, objective 1, phase 1, objective 2, phase 2, objective 3. It just makes things more clearer for the reviewer. Ensure there's logical orientation to the problem you identified, and there's alignment with the methodology and theoretical framework. So here's a literature review that I wrote for. This was a project that we submitted for Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada that looked at African child migration in the circumstances of vulnerability. And this proposal ended up ranking in the top 5 out of 75 applications submitted to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada Partnership Development Grant in 2018 or 2019. So we started, and somewhere there we mentioned, and I think we voted it, what we plan to do will lead the development of a network on African child migration. And I think I started, broadly, what is the goal of the project? Before then we move to literature review and significance. So theoretical framework is, what lens are you looking at this research through? It will inform all stages of the project. Ensure there is epistemological and that there are no epistemological and ontological clashes between your frameworks if you're combining different approaches. What are the methodological implications of your theory? So I've seen theoretical frameworks in the past that people just talk. And it's like, how is this relevant to your literature review? How is this relevant to what you're planning to do? It needs to be clear. And it's often good if your theoretical framework can inform who you recruit, how you collect data, how you analyze data, and also what variables that you consider. So for example, if I was using intersectionality approach, I may be considering issues related to power. I may be considering issues related to marginalization. I may be considering issues related to complexities of social locations in my work. And it may also, using an intersectionality perspective, may also make me consider issues related to reflexivity and reflexive engagement. So I may say, due to that I will be keeping a reflexive journal throughout the research process. So for your methodology, you need to describe the proposed research strategies. Who is the audience? Not the same. So the audience may not be the same one as journal, those in readers of journal articles. Should have alignment with background research? If not, why not? So ensure that there is a good alignment with your background research. Now, it's often good to propose a novel approach, that it's not like, something someone has done, like using novel approach, but you need to also still justify the use of the novel approach and how it will work in your particular, to answer your particular research question. What are the key activities? Demonstrate your capability by presenting steps of the study. So I like to arrange my research proposal in terms of phases, or sometimes I like to arrange it in terms of data sources, so that then it's clear and I have subheadings throughout. Methods should be appropriate with the theoretical framework. And I've seen, times when people are proposing, methods that it's just like, it's not appropriate for the, maybe you've been saying your objectives that you've been stating sort of points towards, a narrative inquiry. So you've been talking about stories and things. And then I see that in your methodology, you're planning to use a case study methodology. And I'm like, what's really the alignment there? Cite research references to your approach in terms of, so sometimes when I've used participatory action research in the past, I have looked at, how have people done participatory action research in the past? Or for example, when you're justifying your sample size, you may have to look at, how have researchers in the past justified sample size for qualitative methods? So oftentimes I've cited, for example, people like Sandelowski and other researchers, other qualitative experts like that to really inform the design of my research. So ensure you include sampling. How are you going to collect your data, your sample size, and your data collection? What's your methods for data collection? Is it interviews? Is it observation, document analysis, archival analysis? What instruments are you going to use? And sometimes some funding agencies will require you to put your interview instrument and interview guide in the appendix. Sometimes it's not required. Data analysis, how exactly are you going to analyze data? So it depends, of course, on the length of the proposal. If it was a 2-page proposal you're writing, some people can just write, I'm going to thematically analyze my data using ATLAS.ti software. But if you're writing a 5-page proposal, I would expect you that you will provide much more detail about how you're going to analyze your data. So, consider you have your, you conducted your first interview. How are you going to analyze your data? And also, how are you going to manage your data? Where is your data going to be shared? Consider issues related to quality, so trustworthiness, and also issues related to ethics. So ensure you include who is going to collect data, who are you interviewing, what are you planning to gather, Where is the data going to be collected? How are you going to collect data? So what instruments are you going to use? And what methods are you going to use? And when are you going to collect data? It's often good to include a timeline, and it helps because most funding agencies have feasibility. It helps to show your feasibility that everything you plan to do can be completed within the time frame. And feasibility, consider feasibility, but also access to participants. So, there are some people that, maybe you want to recruit 50 people or interview 20. And I'm like, what are the chances that you'll be able to? So for example, I know in Canada, for example, in HIV research, it's often, recruitment is often hard. Now, sometimes your partnership with community agencies and organizations may also help in terms of facilitating feasibility of your study. So, or your pre-existing relationship with or track record may also help you in terms of recruitment. Should see links with just budget justification and training of high quality professionals. So there should be a clear link with your methodology and budget justification. So you also want to look at experts, and especially as early career researchers, you want to know, okay, what are the expertise that you have and what are the expertise that you may not have and you need other people to be able to fill the shoes. It's often good to have a complementary expertise. And that could include a consideration of, who has the methodological expertise, for your study. So for example, if, it's your first time that you want to use a case study methodology or grounded theory, do you want to have someone with grounded theory expertise on the team? Substances expertise. So, who has, so if I was looking at Black youth mental health, well, I may have research expertise on Black health, but maybe I don't have expertise on mental health. So I may want to bring someone that has expertise on mental health to bridge the gap. The theoretical expertise, so if you're using intersectionality, if you're using post-colonial theory or social behavioral approach, you want someone that has theoretical expertise. Data analysis expertise, so someone that actually has qualitative expertise to analyze the data. And also sometimes you may want to consider geography. And geography is important when you're doing a research project that is multi-site, more than one site, or when you're doing a research project in an area that you're not located. So if you're, for example, located in Canada and you're collecting data, for example, in Africa, you may want to have someone in Africa be a member of the team to actually help with the groundwork. Student training, consider the level of training and that it should be appropriate. So, what do you give to a bachelor student versus a postdoctoral fellow may be different, and the level of supervision and involvement may be different. Identify existing resources at your institution that students can tap into, such as workshops, software. Identify frequency of meetings and whether hands-on training will be provided in interviews, in analysis of the data. So oftentimes, with a lot of my analysis, if I'm training a student, I would say, maybe the first, 3 or 5 interviews, we'll read it together. And based on that, we'll jointly develop codes. And from that, we would, I would, analyze the initial set of data with the student before then the student goes on to analyze it to complete the analysis. And consultation and training and mentorship throughout. You can also include activities that will improve student training. Some of the activities that students can engage in, to facilitate training could be engaging in research publication, knowledge mobilization, dissemination, knowledge of increasing students' knowledge of research methods, data management and data analysis, research ethics. Students can be exposed to interdisciplinary research. They can gain skills in community engagement. Students can also gain skills in project management, especially students that are, PhD level, leadership and teamwork, and also, workshops, conferences, and organization. So in terms of knowledge mobilization, you need to consider if you want to use integrated knowledge mobilization or end-of-grant knowledge mobilization. And by integrated knowledge mobilization, I mean an approach that facilitates engagement and knowledge mobilization from the conceptualization of the idea, or even before the conceptualization idea, to the very tail of dissemination and mobilization of the idea. Integrated knowledge mobilization often enhances uptake of knowledge by diverse stakeholders. So when you then involve people throughout the research process, they are more likely invested in terms of facilitating the mobilization of those knowledge into policy, into practices, into services. Or some people also just do end-of-grant knowledge mobilization. When you're developing your knowledge mobilization plan, it's good to consider what is your objective, who is your audience, what are the needs of the audience, and what knowledge mobilization tools will support its needs, when and how. And some of the knowledge mobilization tools that I've used in the past includes, of course, the most basic one will be, you're publishing or you're doing conferences, but I've also used things like infographic. I've used policy brief. I've used practice brief. Some people have used, videos, animated videos, you can also, translate some of those knowledge into workshops for stakeholders. Or I've also done stakeholder engagement day, or set up conferences to mobilize knowledge. So this is an example of my knowledge mobilization plan for another proposal that I wrote on temporary foreign workers in Canada. So the way I structured this knowledge mobilization plan is I had the objectives for each stakeholders, and then under each objective, I had things, the strategies that I would use to facilitate knowledge mobilization. One thing I didn't do in this is evaluation of your knowledge mobilization plan. And I would encourage you that in the future, you may want to also look at in what ways do you actually evaluate the outcomes. So for example, doing process evaluation of the amount of stakeholders that were engaged in your sessions is a good idea, or the policies developed from your research. So other things that I think I listed here is website practice brief, policy brief, and stakeholder engagement, or even having media releases, press release. So after I write my proposal, I tend to go through my budget, read it over, and just as I'm reading my budget, highlight on what I need to be able to achieve each step, especially with a focus on knowledge mobilization and the methodology section. So think through your program, ensure accuracy on how much things will cost, and include reasonable overhead costs or indirect costs, that is if allowed. For multi-year grants, include the cost of inflation. So usually I include like 5% if it's like more than a year that I had on top of each year, because I expect that things are going to increase as we proceed. Ensure your budget, and also if there's going to be salary increases for your so ensure you budget that in. Ensure your budget amounts is within the funding limit. So ensure you do not go 1 cent above the funding limit, and extra expenses you've requested is eligible for funding. So I have applied for some grants in the past that I put things on the budget and it's like no, that is not an eligible expense. The problem is that it's not going to be funded, and you have to think about, okay, now where are you going to get funding from to be able to account for that? So again, ensure eligibility. So think about overhead costs. Overhead costs tend to be 10 to 25%. For Global Affairs Canada, I believe overhead costs are around 12 to 15%. For IDRC, it's also 10 to 15. For a lot of Government of Canada, it's 10 to 15%. But there are some funding agencies that will allow 25%. And there are many funding agencies will tell you how much limit you can charge for overhead, or if overhead is even eligible. So there are some funding agencies that you're not allowed to charge. There are a few funding agencies that they have an open term. in terms of your overhead costs. So you can charge any amount that you want. And I think reasonably between 10 to 25% is what I tend to see out there. Personnel and project staff include inflation and salary increases for multi-year, include benefits, EI, employment insurance, and any eligible cost related to payment. Technology, equipment, software, transportation or honorarium for participants, salaries and printing costs, or supplies and printing costs, meal, parking, translation, location rental for events, recruitment and publicity costs, dissemination costs. These are all often eligible costs for a research project. So other things for you to consider is your organizational capacity, right? So is your organization well positioned to be able to carry out this? What expertise exists within your organization to be able to complete this project? And sometimes I talk also about my institutional priorities. If your institutional priorities align with your research project, then you may want to highlight that. And if your organization doesn't have the capacity, is there a way for you to partner with another organization that may help to address some of the gaps that you face? Letter of support from partner institutions are often required in many grants, or and also in several grants. I don't have it here. You may need to submit your CV. So ensure that it's in the correct format, or co-applicant CV. Partnerships, some funding agency appreciate partnership, and some, there's a funding call that I was reviewing recently that they require decision makers to be part of your team. So just look at what may be required in terms of partnership. And also, this is more for intervention. If you're doing an intervention and a program, not as much of a research, is the sustainability if it's a program or research. Several funding agencies have embedded, will require you to demonstrate how you integrate equity, diversity, and inclusion, gender-based analysis plus cultural safety in your research design. So of course, when you're talking about gender-based analysis plus, just be aware that it's it's not just a focus on women and men, but especially depending on the agency, that for many agencies you need to go beyond the binary, and also recognizing what the plus means in gender-based analysis plus. That if you're talking about gender-based analysis plus, for the plus, you need to start thinking about issues related to income inequality, related to race, related to religion, and how that should be considered in your program design. Now, I've seen proposals where people will put EDI strategy, but then they've not had any budget for EDI. So ensure that it's also included in your budget. So for example, if you say language is going to be a challenge, ensure you've included interpretation and translation services in your budget. If you envisage that your population, that income may be a challenge, you may want to ensure that, and for example, if you're attending to women of childbearing age, you may want to ensure that childcare has been incorporated into your budget in some way or another, especially if you're doing a focus group for women of childbearing age. Logic between different parts of your proposal, and I've seen proposals where the literature review and objectives are talking about one thing, and the methodology is talking about something totally different. And then that creates a challenge. Feasibility and ensuring that you can actually complete it within the timeline specified, and that you have the capacity, you have the reach to the population that you're trying to reach. And I think I would, I also have, I have another, section. Maybe I'll go through it fast. Can I go through 5 more minutes, or should I stop now?
Yes, please feel free to continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I also have components of program grant applications, and this is for programs, not for research. So many program grant applications, and I know researchers in other countries, sometimes they write proposals They're more for program development. So for example, a lot of the IDRC grants, a lot of Global Affairs Canada, in fact, Global Affairs Canada does not fund pure research. So they would fund things in IDRC. So, those two agencies, they tend not to fund pure research. Most of the time, IDRC doesn't. Sometimes they do fund pure research. Global Affairs Canada almost never funds pure research. So most of the time, what they will fund that is relevant to research is, for example, if you are doing a participatory action research, an action research project, if you are doing an intervention. So they will fund interventions that has an embedded research component. So the grants, the structures vary widely. Some are structured. So some funding agencies for program applications will have, structure of what they want, and some will be unstructured. So general format for unstructured will usually include the summary, the rationale and the literature review, the program theory or the theory of change or your theoretical framework, the program plan, evaluation, timeline, and budget. So in terms of your objectives, if you're developing a program proposal, you need to ensure that your objectives are measurable, specific, achievable, realistic, or timely. And that means including, an example could be by January 2015, 100% of children at Strathcona Community Public Health will eat nutritional breakfast daily. Now you have the measure there, 100%. You have the time, January 2015, and it is, it is specific, it's achievable, it's also realistic. Now, some program objectives can be by January 2015, there will be a 10% increase in the number of Strathcona Community Public Hospital eating nutritional breakfast. Now, the problem is when you put a 10% increase, then you're looking at having a pre-measure and a post-measure of your approach. Be careful of the measures and the indicators, and look at short-term. You can have short-term indicators, long-term indicators, and medium-term indicators. And the ways different funding agencies will, the perspective of different funding agencies on what is short-term, medium, and long-term usually varies, but these are the general. Long-term tends to be, some agencies will say 0 to 6 months, some will say a year. And medium-term tends to be 1 to 3 years, some will say 1 to 5 years, and long-term tends to be above 3 or 5 years. So if you're developing a program proposal different from a research proposal, you need to identify the gap in the community or in the organization that you're trying to address. So it could be lack of service, growing population, and increased need, no focused services, no services offered on weekends, no services for a specific demographic, recent public outcry against, anti-racism, or, recent, news that warrants the need for services, impact of the pandemic, services are not accessible. So this is a theory of change, and many funding agencies oftentimes require you now to have a theory of change. And it's a set of description of how a set of interventions or actions will lead to the desired outcomes and under what condition. It includes the assumptions, the risk, and the contributing factor. A logic model can help support your theory of change. So some, but not agencies require this. So if you're applying to Global Affairs Canada, you will always have to have a theory of change. Now, Global Affairs Canada have their own format for their logic model that is different from, for example, Public Health Agency of Canada, and different from other funding agencies. But the basic elements are the same. It has input, it has output in short term, medium term, and long term. So this is an example of a grant that I wrote for, I don't know if it's $2 million or $6 million for Global Affairs Canada to look at sexual and reproductive health of adolescent girls in Northern Nigeria. And if you look here for the logic model, and this logic model is a template of Global Affairs Canada, which you cannot change. You have the intermediate outcomes, And you have the immediate outcomes, and also you have the output or the activities that you plan to engage in, which then leads, the output leads to the ultimate outcome. So in terms of program plan and implementation, as I said, as I always say, the devil is in the detail. I've seen program plans and implementation that are often very vague. So thinking about who, when, where, and how long, and the timeline. Why are you choosing to do the intervention in a certain way? So you need the literature to inform, why you're choosing to do the intervention in a certain way. How has it been done? And if you're a researcher, you're also looking at, what new knowledge may this provide in the future, and how you can also be able to scale things up in the future. What is the target population, and who are you excluding, and what challenges do you envisage? So some of the key considerations I've already mentioned: this organizational capacity, partnership, logic between different aspects, and that's why it's nice to have a logic model so that you know that you have a logic. Feasibility, timeline, sustainability, and sustainability is more important in terms of program, that are funded through, Global Affairs Canada and other funding agency, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think I'm almost done. This is a proposal for Public Health Agency of Canada. No, I'm not sure. This is a proposal for Department of Heritage, Government of Canada. And this proposal was funded for a mentorship program, I think, for Black youths. So evaluation, think about formative evaluation and summative evaluation. And it can be both using qualitative or quantitative methods. And again, who, when, how often, method, instrument that you use, and data analysis. And this is my sample evaluation. We're running out of time, so I'll go through this fast. And we're running out of time. Again, this is an evaluation for Public Health, Department of Canadian Heritage. And that's about it. Sorry. I know I was supposed to focus on research, but I had slides from another on program plan that I just included.
Thank you very much, Bukola. I think because you have a mix of people who are both beginning researchers and more seasoned veterans who are putting together a program of research, that last part was really helpful, and speaks to the wide range of people who are interested in this topic. Okay, this is a chance for you to put a few questions into the chat that you are particularly wondering about. And we have some time, and I will have Dr. Salami attend to them. So if you would please give a few minutes now and type in your questions. And while we're waiting for those to come, Bukola, I have a few questions. I'm wondering, as a person who was just starting out, what was the best advice that you got?
The best advice that I got as someone that was still starting out, I think, will be, your service commitment. If you ever to have one service commitment, be on a review committee as soon as possible. It will give you a different perspective, right? Yeah. So it's always good if you can look through the lens of a reviewer. And if you're on a review committee early on, so if your institution has a grant review committee, and if you can get, on the, with the review committee, I would say, consider doing that, because it will really help. And that's the same too. If you want to write good papers for publication, one thing as a doctoral student, early career researcher, is to review papers too. It will help with your publication. And it's the same thing as grants.
Great, thank you. We have a question about capital T0C. What does it mean? I'm guessing it's theory of change.
Theory of change. Theory of change. Sorry. Yeah, theory of change. So the theory of change is usually a theory that it's used a lot in program planning and evaluation, and it's really how does different components of your research lead from the literature to the expected outcome. that you're planning to have. And some people, for the theory of change, they use a logic model to kind of link different components of your research program together.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Well, you've given us lots to think about. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule for this session, Dr. Salami. And it's easy to see the vast breadth of work that you've done. And I think your provision of examples from your own work is particularly helpful. So I'll hand it back over to Ivana to wrap up this session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Karen and Dr. Bukola. Thank you very much for this really insightful presentation. It was really great to learn about this, all the practical advice, and to see your own insider perspective. And so I hope that everyone got some new ideas or inspiration for their own projects. And so you know how you can also move forward with getting your research grants. And so, yes, thank you so much. And you will all receive the recording as well, so you can watch this again. And so I hope that you do find it helpful for your research. And then I just also wanted to share a few words for the audience in case you're ever interested in learning about using the ATLAS.ti software. That we do have a huge variety of free webinars on qualitative analysis and literature reviews, ATLAS.ti. And finally, since you're all participating in this event, you all can count on a special discount coupon if you ever want to get any courses or licenses from ATLAS.ti. So just email us at training@atlas.ti.com and let us know that you attended, and we'd be more than happy to send that over. But I just want to thank everyone once again, and thank you, Professor Olson, for moderating the session, and thank you, Dr. Bukola, for the great presentation and the opportunity to learn from your experience. And last but not least, thank you everyone who's participated here today. So thank you for joining. And I hope, and finally, I just wanted to mention that we will have more sessions coming up. And so, feel free to take a look on the website of ATLAS.ti, as well as the International Qualitative Research Toolkit. We'd be more than happy to see you again in another session in the future. So thank you, everyone. And I wish you all the best in your future research projects.
May I just add one thing? For people to please check the IQRT website. We have sessions coming up on the 24th and the 26th, I think, of May with Dr. Johnny Saldana on coding. You may know that Dr. Saldana recently published a book, Coding Manual, and he's got a 2-part workshop coming up. And then in July, we have an in-person session on arts-based research at UBC Okanagan with Dr. Linda Liebenberg, who's the editor of IJQM. So I would really encourage you to participate in those sessions and have a look at the toolkit. Thanks for putting up that website.
Yeah, the link's in the chat. Yeah, so definitely lots of great resources to explore. Definitely worth checking out.
So we'd love to see you. And once again, the session with Dr. Saldana is free, but there's a small fee for the in-person workshop at UBCO. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.